a daily basis. For me, sculpture is really interesting. It's really exciting to do. And I get really excited when I see the new forms because it's a different world. You know, we know what the world looks like. We know what Istanbul looks like. All the buildings and the roads and all the cars and all the advertisements and the shops and the people and the furniture. It's all the same stuff. You know, I mean, it's always very, very repetitive. But new forms is like seeing a new landscape. It's like meeting a new person. It's a brand new experience with all sorts of dimensions to it that you can't imagine till you see them. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously I'm a sculptor, so I've exhibited a few times here in Istanbul and been here a few times. And so I have the idea of being in a kind of dialogue, if you like, with the Turkish public. And so this is the latest works that I've been working on, so it's a continuation of the things I've made in the past. So that's really how that functions. But I'm working on several different subjects at the same time, some different themes, different forms, and so I work them parallel one to another in different ways. I wasn't really very interested in sculpture because when I was a young person, I didn't look very much at art. I was interested in drawing. So when I went to art school to actually to learn to draw, naively, and it was just in the late 60s and it was a good time, and part of the course they said, next week you'll be doing sculpture. And I thought, oh my God, well, why? And so that's what I started, and it was on a Monday morning where we started to work in the studio, and I just found it so exciting. I mean, within an hour or two I was completely absorbed in working with three-dimensional materials. It's a little bit like, for me, like drawing. What you do is, if you don't just draw something, just making something that always exists in another material has never interested me. So drawing people, horses, trees and things, it's rare. And also making sculptures for me, I don't want to make something that exists in another material, a person in bronze or a horse in stone, that's completely uninteresting. But what does interest me is when I'm working with material, what ideas run through my head and what emotions I'm having. Because with every change of form, every change of volume, of surface, of silhouette, I'm having another feeling about it and having other different thoughts about it. And that I find very exciting. Just making it's exciting. So that's what keeps me going. Even after almost 55 years of doing it, I've still become aware there's so much more to do. Post-war Britain, which was a very poor time. Obviously the country suffered greatly, lost a lot of power and a lot of credibility in a way. Not credibility, but it was a bankrupt town. Life wasn't very easy there. It was really quite tough in the 50s and 60s. I had a wonderful childhood, but materially it was quite miserable, to be honest. Limited society, at least. And suddenly, the first thing that happens, you hear the Beatles, and you hear the Rolling Stones, and you hear Jimi Hendrix, and you hear all of the fantastic, and if it wasn't pop music, you heard fantastic jazz music, John Coltrane, and all these amazing people. And so the culture changed. The young people of that time, they just changed the culture in such a radical way. And it's the same with the generation of artists, the generation of Artie Porverer, Richard Long, land art, conceptual art, all these things. And my interest developed a little bit later on, I've profited from all the sort of the inventions of the time and whatever, and then I could just And I just was lucky enough to find out what I wanted to do. So that was a good time for me, yeah. And I tell you another thing, which I think is really a big advantage, to be honest, in my life, is that I started making work when the art world was very small. The number of people that are interested in contemporary art was in Britain. There were only 6 galleries showing contemporary art. They were very, very small. They were very, very small. And if you went to openings, it was probably the same group of people that always were meeting there, you know. So it was a very, very small thing. And but suddenly nowadays, and I think I'm very happy to have, you know, sort of developed the work in the time. The first work that somebody sold for me, which is an incredible thing. I couldn't believe he'd sold it to anybody. He'd be silly enough to buy something like that. And he gave me the money for it, and it was £50, which today is like, you can't pay a taxi for that. It's a ridiculously small amount. But in the 70s, that was, I think my whole money for the year was £160. So £50 was an enormous. When we say, oh, I got turkey for Christmas, I think that's the saying, isn't it? Well, first of all, I live in Germany, so we have a lot of friends that are Turkish. And I've had Turkish students, and I even have Olgajan who works in the studio with me, a Turkish sculptor. So I have a good relationship to the people. And I've been coming here for over the last decade or more, several times. Every time I've come here, very good experience. Very nice, very engaged people, a very vital, dynamic city with all sorts of crazy stuff next to each other, very smart and very working, and everything functions in a very untypical way. So it's interesting to come here, and I think also what I see as well. I mean that the art scene in Turkey is, if you can say that, an art scene, but there's a lot more interest in contemporary art, you know. I mean, the first Turkish artist I met was way back in the 70s, and that was Sarkis, you know. And he was in Paris at the time, and I guess he still is, and just immediately got into a good relationship with him. Very good artist, fantastic artist. So fundamentally, I mean, works like this, verses, they were works that have their origin a few years ago, because they're essentially, they look very organic, but they're also at the same time, they're also very, very, very structured. There's a lot of geometry inside of these forms. And I think that's, in a way, that's kind of how I see the world. I mean, we have two different ideas of this category, two categories of things. One we call organic, and the other one we call geometric. But the fact of the matter is that, I mean, we all look organic, but without the geometry of my cells, of my bone structure, of my organs, nothing would work. So the reality we're living in is a duality between these two aesthetic worlds. And so work like this was really was reflecting on that subject. In more recent works, what has interested me, among other things, there's always new things cropping up, but among other things, there's a history of making work in steel, because steel is a very, very strong material. Traditionally, sculpture, one thinks of bronze. Bronze is a thousands of year old material, which is fantastic for making polymorphic forms, because when it melts at a relatively low temperature, 940 degrees, it's more liquid than water. So you can pour it in molds and you can make very, very complicated forms. Steel, on the other hand, steel means in Western European language or Latin, it means the strong one. It's the strong one. And the strong one is much more difficult to work. You need it, even at a much higher temperature, it's very thick, it doesn't flow very well. So it's used to be strong, and you can't make such terribly complicated things out of it. But what has been interesting for me, so when I look at the history of steel sculpture, it starts with Tatlin, who makes his constructive sculptures just using I-beams and things from industry, the same material that was in the Eiffel Tower or in the railway bridges of the Industrial Revolution. And it goes on a little bit like that. It continues. It's Chillida, it's Marc de Souvro, it's Anthony Caro, and all of these people. So there's a lot of very constructive work that's been made in steel. And I decided I really wanted to make steel dance. You know, I live in Wuppertal, which is very famous because we had this wonderful artist there, Pina Bausch. So she has poise and she has position. The way the body moves is also an expressive messaging system, if you like, of everything we do. And so I just wanted to make sculpture that has this more fluid and organic kind of quality. So we can look at one of these works or some of these works, and I think this is the work I've been working on for the last 2 or 3 years. Other than that, a new group of works which has been represented here by Stand is just beginning of me looking again, working in this relatively soft material in polyurethane to make forms which have some fragmented kind of almost organic quality to them. So this is quite new for me, and I haven't made so many works, but it's just at the moment it offers a lot of way forward.